The first time I heard the drums, I thought they were my own heartbeat. Sergeant Brunhesk had served the Emperor for 23 years. 23 years of mud and blood, of screaming orders over the thunder of artillery, of watching good men die for inches of worthless ground. His left shoulder bore the scars of an orc chopper that had nearly severed his arm on Gorgo Prime. His right temple carried the puckered mark where shrapnel from a heretic's grenade had kissed him on the killing fields of Mordia Secundus. These were the wounds that showed. The ones that didn't, the ones carved deep into his mind by 2 decades of perpetual war. Those ran deeper than any blade could reach. The drums began on Carthax II during the 3rd month of what the strategists called Operation Righteous Cleansing. The name was a lie, of course. There was nothing righteous about what we did there. The planet had been a paradise once. An agri world where golden wheat swayed under twin suns and children played in fields that stretched to the horizon. When the heretics came, when they poisoned the wells and burned the granaries and razed their blasphemous temples to dark gods, paradise became purgatory. I remember the morning it started. Dawn came red over the trenches, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. The air tasted of cordite and decay, that familiar cocktail of war that had become as familiar to me as my mother's cooking had been back when I still remembered her face. The 47th Cadian Shock had been holding the line for 6 weeks, dug in like ticks on a corpse, waiting for the order that would send us over the top into another meat grinder. Bronze stood at the edge of the fire trench, his last pistol heavy in his scarred hands. The weapon had seen as much war as he had, its metal worn smooth by countless battles, its power cell housing cracked and repaired a dozen times over. Below him, his squad prepared for another day of killing. Trooper Marcus cleaned his lost gun with the methodical precision of a man who understood that a dirty weapon meant death. Corporal Vex checked and rechecked his grenade harness, counting the frags like prayer beads. Young K, barely 18 and still soft around the edges despite 6 months of warfare, stared out at no man's land with eyes that had seen too much for his years. Sergeant. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Cordwer, a pale man with nervous hands, who had arrived 2 weeks ago, fresh from the Scola, and still believed in glory. Command wants us to probe the heretic positions. Sector 7 Alpha grid reference. I listened to the coordinates with half an ear. Numbers on a map, meaningless designations for pieces of ground that would be soaked with blood before the day was done. The lieutenant's voice faded into the background noise of war, the constant low rumble of distant artillery, the crack of sniper fire, the wet sounds of wounded men crying for their mothers in the medical bunkers. That was when I heard it. Beneath the chaos of battle, beneath the lieutenant's nervous chatter and the morning prayers of the dying, there was something else. A rhythm, deep and primal, like the beating of a massive heart buried somewhere beneath the earth. Thump, 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 thump. At first, I thought it was my pulse pounding in my ears, the way it sometimes did when the adrenaline spiked before a charge. But this was different. This came from outside, from somewhere beyond the trenches, beyond the war itself. It called to something inside me, something that had been sleeping for 23 years of loyal service. Sergeant Hesk, are you listening? Cordwer's voice had taken on an edge of irritation. Officers didn't like being ignored, especially by non-commissioned men who had forgotten more about war than they would ever learn. Yes, sir. The words came automatically learned through decades of military conditioning. Sector 7 Alpha recon in force. Assess enemy strength and disposition. Precisely. Take your squad forward at 0900. Try not to get them all killed, Sergeant. The lieutenant walked away, his boots squatching in the perpetual mud that lined the trenches. He would be dead within a month. I knew they all were. These fresh-faced officers with their dreams of promotion and their leather-bound copies of the Imperial Guard manual. The war would chew them up and spit out their bones just as it had chewed up all the others. But the drums continued. I tried to shake the sound from my head, rolling my shoulders and working my neck until the joints cracked. The rhythm persisted, steady and insistent, matching the pace of my breathing. It wasn't unpleasant exactly. If anything, it felt natural, like a song I had once known but forgotten. like coming home after a long journey. "All right, you worthless dogs." I barked at my squad, falling into the familiar cadence of command. "We're going over the top in 30 minutes. Check your weapons. Check your armor. Check the man next to you because his life might be the only thing standing between you and a heretic's blade." The men responded with the practiced efficiency of veterans. Even young Kane moved with purpose now, his hands steady as he chambered a fresh power cell into his las gun. These were good soldiers, men I had trained and fought beside and bled with across half a dozen worlds. They deserved better than to die for inches of poisoned dirt on a planet whose name would be forgotten by history. The drums grew louder as we prepared to move out. They seemed to echo off the trench walls, reverberating through the packed earth and broken ferrocrete that formed our makeshift fortifications. I wondered if the others could hear them, too, but their faces showed no sign of recognition. Perhaps it was just me. Perhaps 23 years of war had finally caught up with the inside of my skull. At 0900 precisely, we went over the top. The no-man's land of Kartax Iaith stretched before us like a vision of the hell that awaited the unfaithful. Shell craters filled with stagnant water reflected the bloody sky. Coils of razor wire glinted with morning dew that looked suspiciously like tears. The bodies of previous assaults lay scattered across the torn ground, some in the uniform of the guard, others wearing the crude armor and blasphemous symbols of the heretics. The dead made no distinction between loyalty and treachery. They were all just meat now, left to rot under alien suns. We moved in standard formation, Vex on point, Marcus and Kane covering the flanks. Myself bringing up the rear with the Vox unit crackling against my back. The going was slow. Every step a negotiation with the sucking mud and twisted metal that carpeted the battlefield. Somewhere ahead, the heretics waited in their own trenches, just as cold and miserable as we were, just as ready to die for their convictions. The drums continued their relentless rhythm, and I found myself moving to their beat. Step, step, step. My boots squelched in perfect time with the phantom percussion that filled my head. It gave me strength somehow, made each step feel lighter despite the weight of my gear, made the lost gun in my hands feel like an extension of my own body rather than just another piece of military hardware. Contact front. Vex whispered into his micro bead. 200 fortified position. Looks like a listening post. I crawled forward through the muck until I could see what he was talking about. A cluster of sandbags and broken ferrocrete formed a rough circle around what had once been a civilian dwelling. The windows had been blocked with metal plates. Gun ports cut at strategic intervals. Smoke drifted from a makeshift chimney carrying the smell of cooking meat that made my stomach growl despite the circumstances. "How many?" I asked. "Hard to tell, Sergeant. I count at least 4, maybe 6. Light weapons, nothing we can't handle." Standard procedure would have been to call in artillery to rain down Emperor's wrath from above until nothing remained but crater and corpses. But artillery was precious on Karth's Iaith, and command had made it clear that every shell needed to count. We would have to take the position the hard way with last fire and steel and the kind of close-quarters butchery that separated soldiers from civilians. The drums pounded harder as I studied the heretic position. My pulse quickened and I could feel something stirring in my chest, something that had been dormant for too long. It was anticipation, I told myself, the natural response of a veteran soldier preparing for combat. Nothing more than that. "Marcus Caney, you'll provide covering fire from that shell crater to our left," I said, pointing to a depression that would give them a clear line of sight to the enemy position. "Vex, you're with me. We'll work our way around to the right flank. Try to get behind them before they know we're here." "What about prisoners?" Sergeant Ka asked. Command wanted intelligence on their numbers and dispositions. I looked at the young trooper for a long moment, remembering when I had been like him, when I still believed that wars could be fought cleanly, that there was honor to be found in the killing fields, that the Emperor's light could shine through even the darkest campaigns. That innocence was precious, and part of me wanted to preserve it for as long as possible. But the drums were getting louder now, and with them came a hunger I had never felt before. A need that went beyond duty or tactics, or the simple desire to survive another day. I wanted to see blood. I wanted to hear screams. I wanted to feel bones break under my hands and watch the light fade from enemy eyes as they realized that their dark gods could not save them from the fury of the Imperial Guard. No prisoners, I heard myself say. Kill them all. The words surprised me. In 23 years of service, I had always followed the rules of engagement, always tried to conduct myself with the honor befitting a servant of the throne. Prisoners were valuable. Intelligence was crucial. Unnecessary killing served no tactical purpose and reflected poorly on the regiment's discipline. But as soon as I spoke the words, they felt right, natural, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting to open for decades. We moved into position with the practiced stealth of veteran soldiers. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled, every heartbeat synchronized with the phantom drums that continued to thunder in my skull. The sound was so loud now that I couldn't understand how the others failed to hear it. It seemed to shake the very ground beneath our feet, to echo off the clouds and reverberate through the bones of the earth itself. The first heretic died without ever knowing we were there. Vex put a lust bolt through his head as the man stood up to stretch his back, probably tired from a long night of standing watch. The corpse toppled backward into the fortified position, and I heard shouts of alarm from the others inside. Now! I roared, and we were moving. The next few minutes became a blur of violence and noise. Last fire crackled through the air, painting everything in strobing red light. The heretics returned fire with auto guns and stubbers, filling the air with the angry buzz of solid projectiles. Someone was screaming, though I couldn't tell if it was one of ours or one of theirs. I vaulted over the sandbag wall and landed in the middle of their position. A heretic swung at me with a combat knife, the blade whistling past my throat as I twisted away. My last pistol barked twice, both shots taking the man's center mass. He dropped like a sack of grain, his weapon clattering away across the ferrocrete floor. Another heretic emerged from a side room, a heavy stubber clutched in his hands. The weapon was massive, designed for suppressing entire squads rather than engaging single targets. But at this range, it would tear me in half if he managed to bring it to bear. I could see his finger tightening on the trigger, see the muzzle swinging around to track me. The drums reached a crescendo, and time seemed to slow. I moved without thinking, my body acting on instincts I didn't know I possessed. The last pistol dropped from my nerveless fingers as I lunged forward, covering the distance between us in a single bound. My hands found the heretic's throat, fingers digging deep into flesh that felt warm and soft and infinitely fragile. The stub fired once, the shot going wild, and then I was crushing his windpipe with strength that seemed to come from somewhere outside myself. He tried to fight back, clawing at my hands, beating against my chest with fists that felt like gentle rain, but it was useless. I was stronger than I had ever been, filled with power that flowed through me like liquid fire. The heretic's eyes bulged in their sockets, his face turning purple as I squeezed the life from his body. I could feel his pulse fluttering against my thumbs, could hear the wet rattle as his lungs fought for air that would never come. And I laughed. The sound that came from my throat was not the laugh of Sergeant Bernesque, loyal servant of the throne. It was something darker, hungrier, filled with joy at the sight of suffering and death. The heretics,